All right. Welcome back to Context. We are joined today by the dynamic duo of Randi and Duez Henderson, head coach and associate head coach at Washington University of St. Louis. Thank you for joining us today.
Good to be here.
Appreciate you having us.
All right, well, let's just dive in. So, you guys have a unique backstory, and I would love to hear your background in coaching. How did you get involved? What was the process of you landing your first job and any subsequent jobs since then?
Well, for me, I played at the University of Iowa, and I actually never wanted to be a coach. And so I know I had a radio interview at some point when I was playing, and I had been a team captain the whole time I was at Iowa. And one of the questions was, do you plan on being a coach? And I emphatically said no. And one of the reasons was because I didn't want to make anybody cry. Not that I spent my whole career crying, because I didn't, but I had been challenged by basketball and my coaches a lot, and it had been hard, but a good challenge, but it just wasn't something I saw myself doing. And then I went to grad school, and out of grad school, I applied for like tons of jobs, and the only one coaching job, and that ended up being the only job I was offered out of grad school. And so it was a job that was halftime of intramurals and director and halftime assistant basketball coach at a Division III school. And I was unfamiliar with Division III at the time. I didn't even know it existed, because I just, kind of played basketball, and I mean, my whole basketball story is also very strange. But anyway, so I ended up being there for 2 years as the intramural director and assistant basketball coach. And I actually had resigned as the assistant basketball coach for some, just differences in opinions. And then they had offered me a full-time position as the director of recreation. And I was the director of recreation for probably 2 weeks before our head coach, women's basketball coach, resigned. And I was running on a treadmill in the rec center, and the chancellor happened to be running next to me. And he said, "Would you like to be our new women's basketball coach?" And I said, "Is this our formal interview?" And he said, "Yeah, stop in my office on Monday." And so then I became the head. That's how I got my first head coaching job, was on a treadmill and next to the chancellor, which we had worked out next to each other a lot. And he's a pretty cool guy. And so I was a head coach there. And then I ended up calling Co-College, was a head coach there that I knew from getting recruited at Wisconsin. And I was calling her for some assistant coach recommendations. And she said, "I don't really have anybody that I can recommend, but would you be interested in my job?" And I said, "What?" And she said, "I'm leaving to go to Florida State with another coach that she had worked with." And she said, "And my job is going to be open in the next month, and I think you'd be great." So I got that job. And that's how I moved from, and it was closer to home for me, and, a program that I felt like I could help rebuild. And then I was at for, I don't know, 9 years or something. And my college roommate was a head coach at UNC Charlotte, and she, we had kept in touch and whatever through basketball stuff. And she had an assistant coaching position open up and called me and asked me if I wanted to come in and be her assistant coach. And at the time, a lot of stuff was changing at the school. Duez and I had just gotten married. I was like, if I'm ever going to do this and see it, about it, this is the time to do it. So then we up and moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, where I became an assistant coach there. And then from there, WashU, I never really thought would come open, because the coach there had been there forever. She is literally a legend, a Hall of Famer, someone I totally respect and look up to. But she had 2 players on her team that I had recruited, and both of them called me and asked me if I would apply for the job at WashU. And so then I applied and WashU, and somehow ended up being chosen for the job at WashU. So that is a synopsis of my coaching journey, which I know is not the same as everybody else's.
No, and it's still fascinating because it sounds like it is the archetype of luck is when preparation meets opportunity. You know, running on a treadmill, happening to be next to the chancellor, but you're prepared and ready and dive in and, you know, have enough success to use that as a springboard to these other opportunities. Now, if I remember, Duez, you had a similar story as far as getting into coaching where it wasn't front of mind and kind of got dragged into it at the beginning. And now the evolution has been such that you are working together, coaching a team.
Definitely. It is one of the situations where, I played in Germany for 6 years, coached a year over there, and then I came back. I was dead set on getting in college coaching. I reached out to everyone I had played against, played for, been recruited by, and it was crickets. Nothing came back. That was a little bit disappointing, but I wasn't going to let it stop me. I knew I was going to stay in the game at some point, and that's at some time during that point, I turned my focus to the private sector, basically skill development, and then also with the AAU programs. And I got, as I started to build that, started to build a reputation, started to build a brand with that started to take off, and I started to really look at my lifestyle and hey, this is not bad, right? This is really awesome. I get to be involved in a lot of different kind of funnels. I get to impact people in a lot of different ways. I get to, for lack of better words, I get to do it my way, which was appealing to me at the time. Knowing that the college level was still something I was keeping my eye on and would be open to opportunities if it presented itself. But I ended up for the better part of 10 or 12 years doing a lot of training, doing again, just with the different AAU programs on boys and girls side. And when I say AAU programs, I ran it in a different way than a lot of people kind of think about when they hear AAU. It wasn't, I didn't have the top players in the state. It was just a lot of, for lack of better words, kids who wanted to be coached, kids who wanted to, play the right way. And, within that, I had some players that went on to play Division I. I had some players that hung it up after high school, and they all had great experiences and all had kind of different end goals with that. And during this time, this is when Randy and I reacquainted, and it was actually one of the players that I was training at the time was being recruited by Randy. So I, for lack of better words, finagled Randy into coming to watch this player work out. Me fully knowing that I was going to sit there and talk to her while my partner conducted the workout. But, that was kind of our first unofficial date. She still doesn't realize it was our first date, but it truly was. So, that's when Randy was at Co College in Cedar Rapids. And I slowly, again, the second unofficial date was I called her. I was like, hey, Randy, what time are you guys practicing this week? I want to come up to a practice and check it out. Wasn't going to check out the Cohawks. I was coming to check out the head coach. But again, she still either didn't know it or was just, refused to believe it. But, during that year, I started, once we got serious dating, I started coming more practices. I started to help out a little bit here and there. I always found myself in the first row behind the bench during games. I actually got a technical from the stands during one of the games. Referee called, he has a very questionable call. I just got to make sure I'm plugged in here. Has a very questionable call. And I yell something, and the referee stops, blows the whistle. I got a technical foul, and Randy's like, on who? And he goes, the guy on your bench. And he turns around, and there's no guy on the bench. He turns up, and he looks at me, and I'm just smiling. I'm 2 rows behind the bench. So he has to take it back, and it's a warning or whatever. But, I love the way that Randy coached. We complimented each other well during that time. She respected what I brought to the table, and just kind of continue to build there. I started coming to more practices and basically became an unofficial volunteer. Then fast forward again, like Randy said, we made the move to Charlotte. While she was at Charlotte, I was still heavily involved, but not in an official capacity. I think coaches are starting to realize that when they hire Randy, they kind of get me
You,
Yeah, my computer just died.
oh.
So yeah, I think coaches realize they get it's kind of a 2-for-1 deal with the both of us. And then again, I was still involved in the private sector at that point. And once we moved to WashU, we really started exploring like, hey, we're really good in the gym together. We complement each other well. What can we do to make this official? And as for the last 2 years, it's been official here. I've been on staff in a full-time capacity, and it's been great. It's helped. Our family life. My schedule's a little bit less hectic. We have very similar schedules now, and it's able to work. So again, just kind of two people with very unconventional coaching paths.
It's fascinating that the path of your journey was obviously not normal relative to what other people may have experienced, but that you actually found, not just in life as partners, but on the court as partners, how to best complement each other in a way that you don't need to look elsewhere for an assistant. The working relationship is obviously solid, and you figured out how to balance and compartmentalize that. But since the journey, especially for you, Duez, was a little bit different than the traditional, ladder climbing of basketball coaching, it leaves me with the question, Randy, as you fell in and had the opportunity with each of these jobs, especially as the head coach, right? It's a different jump. And Duez, as you came in as the associate, formalized head coach, and even your job with the Storm, right, which is your side gig.
St. Louis Surge. It's Surge.
My fault.
Yeah, no, you're good.
What did you realize very quickly that you still needed to figure out?
Me as a head coach?
Yeah, both of you. Yeah, in that role, right? It's like, oh, I'm going from this seat to this seat, and I think I have it. I'm prepared, and obviously I'm not.
Yeah, for me, and this is something I'm still working on. Randy still reminds me, I will get so locked in on one specific part of the game or one thing that we're doing or not doing, and I let that take over and I forget about everything else. And that's just the way I am, right? Like once I see something, it's hard for me to unsee until it's either done or it's fixed. And at some of the places that I've coached before, or if it's an AAU game, there's not necessarily as many things going on, so you can afford to just pick that one thing. And I'll be completely honest, transparent here. The stakes aren't as high, right? But when you take the step up, right, you got to have that whole picture look. You got to be able to see everything that's going on. You got to be able to take yourself out of it, so you can see what it really looks like, and then put yourself back in it so you can fix it. And I have a tendency just to put myself in it and get wrapped up around one thing and let that kind of engulf me.
That's interesting. I think for me, one of the big things that I have had to figure out since taking this next step, even with Duez, like Duez is a really strong leader, right? He is made to be in charge. He is direct. He is capable of leading, right? He is an alpha. And for me as a head coach, I've never had an assistant coach that's that strong. Like they've been good, right? They've been good help. I've found ways to complement their weaknesses and strengths, but like to really work alongside someone that is your equal. And, for me, that's something that I'm still learning. Like what lanes can he operate in well that I'm to the point with him that we can like divide and conquer, truly divide and conquer, and bounce ideas back and forth and have like so many more moving parts. And I can trust him with different things, but he really needs to be in charge of things too, to be best and be at his best. And that's what I want him to be at his best. And so figuring out the things that I can let go of, and let him run with, even in the gym, like the things that really matter to him and that he wants to teach, like we have had to work through, like getting him to feel comfortable, like you can say and do whatever you want, like this is your team too. I think the amount of times I say this is our team, right? Like, so for me, those are the things that I feel like I have had to figure out, because I have such a strong assistant coach that is, meant to be in charge.
Well, it sounds like both of you have developed, or it's innate, a great sense of self-awareness and emotional intelligence in regards to, hey, here are the things that I need to grow in. Here are the things that are a strength. And here's how, my staff collectively, we can fill the blind spots for one another. And, to Duez's comment, I was at a conference years ago where they talked about being on the dance floor and the balcony at the same time, where you can see what's happening and be participating. And that's, the highest level of self-awareness, where you can be in both places, and it's hard to get to, but knowledge of that's what I need to do is the important first step. Mm-hmm. And then, Randy, in your description, it's like, okay, Duez is really good at X, Y, and Z. Let him run with that. I'm going to do the other things, and figuring out how to partner to give the best experience to your athletes, who, obviously should be at the center of the equation. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you have been able to develop certain things that you've brought with you, from stop to stop. But what I am curious about is, what's the best thing you guys do within your program that has the largest ripple effect on your culture, right? Maybe it's a tangible, maybe it's an intangible, but something that, hey, if in the event we go someplace else, we're definitely doing X.
I'll let Randy think on this. And this is something that I get to see, that it comes natural to her. I don't even know if she realized the good job that she does with it. But a lot of times, right, like when I talk to coaches, when I hear things, when I watch different videos or listen to podcasts, it's almost like, all right, hey, here's our basketball part of it, and then here's our culture part of it. And they're two separate entities in a lot of times, or that's how people speak of it. I think Randy and myself, because it's a team effort, we do a really good job of intertwining the two, right? Making it like, hey, this is who we are. This is not who we are as a basketball person. This is not who we are off the floor. The minute you sign on to be a part of this program, this is what you are going to do. This is what's going to be expected of you on the floor, in the weight room, in the dorms, in the airport, on the bus. And therefore, first of all, it becomes part of who we are as WashU women's basketball. And then second of all, those expectations don't change. They're going to be respectful of anyone on the floor. They're going to be respectful, not always agree with. They're going to be respectful of the coaches, of the trainers, of the managers, of the flight attendants, of the bus drivers, just like they are going to be of the officials, of their teammates, and their professors. Right? So now it's like you don't have to wonder like who you have to be or how you have to act in this situation. Randi does a really good job, and I think she's very intentional about wrapping it all up into one. And like, hey, this is who we are. There's no guesswork involved with it.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I think, so we work really hard at making our values come to life and to look like things on the floor, how you play, right? How you carry yourself, how you communicate, to showing up to appointments, but I think in order to do that and to bring life to some of the values and the expectations of who we're chasing our players to become, you have to be willing to have and take the time to have hard conversations. And I think that's one thing that coaches have a hard time giving up, because practice time is so important. But, here's a perfect example. With Duez and this stuff going on. Like, it's a crazy semester. Like, nothing about this is normal. But we had a situation with our players. One of our commitments is to prioritize and organize our schedule to make sure we're meeting our responsibilities. Practice is one of those responsibilities, right? And at a really high academic institution, our players get super stressed with school and studying and all this stuff. So we have to be really clear about what you can miss practice for and what needs to be a conversation. And one of our players didn't have a conversation. She just sent me a text like, I can't come to practice. I have too much to do. And so that is like, okay, this is a learning lesson. This is from one of our we don't have any upperclassmen, we're super young, but this is a teachable moment that we need to take the time and practice to there's 3 different ways you can approach this. There's a wrong way, there's a kind of right, and then there's a right. And if you don't have that conversation and they don't learn from that, well, fast forward, this happened in the gap where we ended up getting canceled our practices. And so we couldn't have the conversation. And since we haven't had that conversation yet, right, we have had probably 3 other scenarios where people just haven't approached it in the way that they're supposed to. And it's not their fault. It's our fault. We haven't had the conversation to take that and make that a teachable moment. So it's very clear how they should be prioritizing and organizing their schedules. And when they can't meet their responsibilities, how they should communicate. And so I think that's something else that we do. I am committed to doing, is taking the time to take advantage of teachable moments so that they know what these things look like and what they look like when they're not doing them.
And that's, I'm going to back up a little bit about me getting so tunnel vision. This was a great example. When we got that text from that player, like, I was like zoomed in, like, this is ridiculous. There's no way it should happen. She should know better. And, Randy's looking like big picture, like, okay, we haven't made it a big enough point before. We've talked about it. Obviously, the message hasn't gone through. And now what can we do? How quickly can we do something to avoid this happening the next time? And I'm like, I don't care about next time. I don't care what we haven't done. Let me be mad right now. I'm zoned in. I want to be mad right now. I know this is a teachable moment, but let me be mad about it right now. Right. And then looking back on it, as she said, like, it's caused more frustrations because we haven't been able to, have those conversations. So that's it's just a really good example about me getting zoned in and not focusing on the big picture when it needs to be big picture.
Yes. And my takeaway from both of your contributions is, look, focus on the core values. Teach those. Behavioral standards are important. Consistently enforcing and speaking about them is what helps build and sustain your culture. And that leaning into difficult conversations, which most people avoid, is the quickest way to break down that culture. And the idea that a text for this generation about conveying information is age appropriate and a teachable moment that we have to recognize as a different generation and help this group understand there is a right and a kind of right and a wrong way to approach certain situations is the takeaway I leave with. And it goes back to, probably the first thing out of Duez's mouth when I met him years ago, which is, how you do anything is how you do everything. And it seems to build right into this idea. And, it's, I think, an important lesson that it all has to be intertwined, right? You can't have this going on in this circumstance and something completely different over here. While the circumstances may be different, the value system underneath is your foundation and your bedrock. Does that sound about right?
Yep.
Great. I'm curious how much time you have been able to spend watching others coach and lessons that you have been able to steal or shift and implement in your own way. that may or may not be basketball people, right? Are there other sports that have informed what you're doing in your own background, playing whatever you played as a youth? Have those come with you? But I'm always curious, how much I've figured out I can learn by looking out my office window, watching the water polo team that I can apply to my basketball team.
I would say I've learned a ton by watching leaders in general, right? I was really fortunate my senior year of college to have Coach Bluter and her staff come in, and they were so dramatically different from the first 3 years. And I had a different position coach every single year I played. And so I was impacted by very different kinds of coaching and teaching during that situation. So I feel like, my ability to learn from just my playing experience was extremely beneficial. And then before I got into coaching, I worked with people with disabilities, and I took them on adventure trips like all over the country. And in those situations, you're leading differently. And I learned so much from that experience, just about the human component of what is involved in coaching and getting people to do more than what they think they're capable of. Because I was like, the whole thing is I'm taking these people who have these disabilities that haven't done some of this stuff, and I'm getting them to believe that they can actually do this, right? They're capable of having this experience. They're capable of helping me cook on a camp stove, or do the dishes, or whatever little task. Like, some people came out of there able to do things that they thought they'd never be able to do, right? And that's what coaching is to me. And so for me, that was a huge shaping moment of like, man, I can really help people see and believe in their ability and kind of challenge themselves to get further. And so I think then, I had a football coach at Coach Staker. He just passed away from cancer, and everything that he did was for other people, right? I can think of a time that he came into my office and he was just sick about us losing a game that he knew we were better than the team. And he's like, I just really want to talk to your team. Like, I just want to have a conversation with them. And the fact that, one, he took the time during his season and being busy to come to my office to say something to me. He's an older guy. Then he goes into my players and he just speaks from his heart about how talented he sees these players being, how much love they have for each other, and it was like, man, this is like just such an amazing for others, like servant-hearted person that I just wanted to be like that. And then my boss at College, my athletic director, we had a great relationship, but something that I just admired and respected out of him is that he was the same. Like, he was a servant. He was an athletic trainer before. He would fill in for the athletic trainers. There was a time during the floods in Iowa, it happened to flood the basement of our rec facility. And I came in to work out, not knowing it was flooded. And he was in there by himself, vacuuming up the water, right? He cleaned our floors before our games. Like, this guy cared so much about people. And like, I get emotional because like I miss him, but he was so impactful in my who I want to be as a leader. And I don't know, like, those are the kind of people that have really changed and shaped who I want to be as a coach and a leader, are these great people that are for others and really giving up their time for others. So I would say that is a couple of people I can think of that have really dramatically impacted my life.
Yeah, I think it goes back to me from, my high school coach, playing from two different staffs at Iowa. All three were very impactful, but impactful in different ways. And as I look back, what I learned was that there's so many different ways to do things and still get the same results. As long as you're committed to doing those things, as long as you believe in what you're doing. Coach Davis, who recruited me and who I played for my first year at Iowa, Tom Davis, he was very laid back. A lot of it was on you to get it done. And I think that's why, traditionally, if you look kind of at his trajectory, like his upperclassmen truly like produced the most, and they usually had the best success. Then Steve Alford comes in my sophomore year, and I end up playing for him for 3 years. He was much more, I'm not going to leave this up to chance. I'm going to make sure you're doing what you need to do. I'm going to make sure that you are shooting these extra shots. Like this voluntary or, optional gym time is really not mandatory. It's really not optional, right? You got to be there because you need to put in the work, right? And that's what he had done as a player. That's what he had done playing for Bobby Knight. And that's what he carried on with him, right? So I look back and just like there are for lack of better words, there's so many different ways to skin a cat and still be successful in doing that, right? So that's a big lesson that I take away with me. And then the other thing is, like, I like to watch different coaches. I like to watch other sports, but I love to watch people who are great at their job, regardless of what it is. It could be something that I have no knowledge about. Like I can see when people are good at their job, and that like it excites me. Randy and I were watching this Voices of Fire Netflix series the other day. It's like a reality show on creating like this world-class gospel choir. And they have one of the world's like best choir directors. And I know nothing about choir directing, but I know this guy is good at his job, right? And it's because he's engaging, right? He's motivating. He's able to, show his passion. He's able to inspire people, like just all those different things, right? I can see that in a choir director. I can see it at a person working the drive-through at Chick-fil-A. I can see it in a preschool teacher that our 4-year-old has. Like seeing people who are good at their job really motivates me. And I kind of look and say, okay, hey, why are you good? Right? I don't care about someone who is like good because they sell a ton of books or because they can keynote speak for $25K a night. Like I want to be able to, I want something that motivates me. And when I see that, now it's like, okay, hey, what can I pull from there? Why are you so good? And that's what like really like gets me going with that stuff.
Yeah, I love both of those stories. And, my takeaway again with Randy's story is you have to see what you're working with and adjust to meet them where they are. And that everyone's capable of learning, everyone's capable of growing. And I did, as a child, my mom, had us working at the Special Olympics, and then as an adult, I'm doing that with my children and figuring out, how to coach that group of athletes. And then, my job as the head basketball coach for the boys, I also coach the middle school girls at the same time, and it's the things that translate that you wouldn't think about, and the way in which you have to maybe think about your approach has been so helpful, and probably never would have done it if there wasn't a need for that. And, in Duez's case, that the choir analogy lands with me because we have an unbelievable vocals program, and our choir director knocks it out of the park. And it's something that I always look forward to watching and shoot her some messages afterwards. But I haven't thought until you just said that, man, I need to just go sit in and watch how she actually gets to this point, because there's a ton of value there. And, to your point about Alfred, we like to call that optatory here. And it's, the workout's optional. So is playing time. And figuring out how to, share that. Here's why you do this. And it only benefits you. So you have a choice to opt in. Ultimately, I have a choice as to who is going to play. So I think, any of those buttons are good. And people, I think, to your other point, is you have to be yourself, right? So if you're really good at inspiration and that's your deal, okay, lean into that. Don't try to be, right, somebody else. And that's something that I've been able to watch as our faculty communicate with people, and as my kids go through school, what each teacher brings to the table. And they're all so different, but they're really good at what they do. And I just hadn't thought of it till you mentioned that. So thank you for sharing. How would you guys say, and maybe the answer is the same, might be different for both of you, that your approach to coaching has changed throughout your career? Yes, the approach is part of shape, if I remember, right?
Well, I think that I don't know if my approach has changed. I think The only reason that I coach isn't because of, I love winning, I love competing, but I have never been interested in coaching because of that. My basketball knowledge, my ability to teach, that's like whatever, but is the impact I can make on other people. And that has been since I started coaching. Like, I'm not in it for the wins, I'm in it for the people. And that's been challenging at different places. And I think too, within that, so because that's why I do it, I've had to progressively work harder and harder and harder to connect with my players. It's a very different situation and scenario what they grow up with, right? And I'm getting older, obviously, and I didn't grow up the same way as them. My experiences weren't the same as them. They're learning things about just different ways to approach inclusivity and all these things that, we didn't grow up with that stuff. And so I have had to, I think, work much more intentionally. And like, I'm still trying to figure out the best way to connect with the players in a way that's comfortable for me. So I think that my approach hasn't changed, but maybe like my intentionality and the way that I can get to the point that I want to, because I am a challenger by nature. Like, I challenge players to dig in, and in order to do that, the relationship has to be established. And so I would say that has changed. And for me also, I've definitely chilled out a lot. My first couple of years of coaching, I think I took them not doing what we practiced, or I taught them really personally, and it made me pretty emotional as a coach. And I definitely am a lot less emotional. Game days, I don't take things nearly as personally, and so that is one thing that I think I definitely have changed as a coach. No, not too many. I still have some, but not too many explosions.
Right. Well, I would imagine at this point, as you've, let's say, matured as a coach, as we all do, that the relationship piece, based on my conversation, seems to take center stage rather than the strategy piece. And even in what you just said, I don't even want to call it their failings, but what ends up on the court not being what we practice personally anymore. And Tim and Brian Kite would say, if you're watching film and what you see isn't what you taught, then you need to look at your teaching, versus our knee-jerk reaction when we're younger is they're not doing what we asked.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I've had 2 kids in this process too. I've gotten married. Like, it just is, you have to balance a lot more responsibility, and you have to basically love a lot more. Like, there's a lot more love you have to spread. So I think my capacity to love has grown, but I've also become super protective of the moments I have with my kids and my spouse at home, and my time. So those are just things that have, I feel like, changed and evolved as a natural part of getting older.
For me, a lot of the way I coach is rooted kind of in my progression as a basketball player. When I was younger, when I say younger, I mean, I started playing organized at 7th grade, and I was pretty bad, for lack of better words, right? And I don't have one of these like, oh, this person just inspired me so much to, like, for some reason, I decided to work at it. For some reason, I decided to have a great attitude about it, right? And by the time I was in 9th grade, it was like, oh, all right, I can make something out of this. Like, I started getting a little bit of attention, and then college attention came, and all of that. I have never, from the time I started playing basketball in 7th grade, I've never been the most talented player on my team. I played in NCAA tournaments. I won Big Ten championships. I played professionally and got a check for playing for basketball. And I've never been the most talented person on my team. I was good, but I've never been the most talented, right? And I take that as a compliment, because it's about the other things that I did along with that, right? To simplify it, it's work and attitude, right? Those are the drivers, and they can take people so far, and especially when I was coaching younger kids, in AAU, it's like, this is like, if you can get this down, I'm gonna challenge you to do it. And you're going to think that it's only because I want to beat this Fairfax Stars team or whatever, but it is because I know these two things are undefeated, right? They may not take you to exactly where you want to go, but they're going to take you somewhere, right? Whether it's in your relationship, whether it's in your career, whether it's within athletics, right? And those two things still go with me. Like, you can miss as many shots as you want, right? Like, Randy will tell you, someone has a bad attitude, someone's giving no effort, steam is coming out of my ears, right? Like, those are the two things I hang my hat on in a lot of things. That's what I hang my hat on with our kids at home. Right? Like, I let them, like, my list of things that bother me is pretty slow, but once they hit those buttons, it's like Mama Bear has to step in and save them sometimes.
Attitude and effort are controllables, right? So those are things that, regardless of circumstance, you can control. And therefore, there's, and what I share is there's no excuse for not doing those things. The other things, we can't control, but what, I've stolen in COVID is we're 100% responsible for our response to circumstances we didn't create. And how do you want to navigate that, right? Do you want to boohoo and not deal with the reality, or do you want to embrace the reality and have a great attitude and stay positive and get to the other side, right? And I think those are the important lessons that I love that you're teaching your kids. That's a big thing in my house. And how do we take that message into everything else that we do? Now, I mentioned this before we began recording, that I had a different thought and direction that I wanted to throw into this interview in regards to, let's say, basketball specifically. And it doesn't have to be X's and O's. It can be management. It can be leadership. It can be whatever aspect of coaching this speaks to for you. But what have you, let's say most recently, changed your mind about?
Let's see. This is, you said coaching in particular?
It can be about anything that fits into the idea of coaching and leadership. How you attack your job, how you teach, how you navigate your team. It can be strategy, whatever. It's just, I'm curious. Like, I was thinking about this the other day when I heard it myself, and I was like, well, that's a great question. Because we often, again, as we grow as coaches and mature, things change. And we make intentional, to your comment earlier, our intentionality gets focused. And so I'm curious, just, what have you changed your mind about?
I got to think about this for a second.
No worries. Take your time. I can edit this stuff out.
Yeah. It's for me, this year in particular, with getting diagnosed with cancer and everything, I've spent a lot of time changing my mind about how I fuel my body. And so, it's not as coach related, so I have to think about it, and how I prioritize my time and what I do with my time, because, I had this fear of how much time I have left and how can I prevent this from happening again? These have been overwhelming thoughts for me. So I definitely have changed my mind on the fuel and what I'm putting into my body. Like, again, how my values are showing up in my life. Right. So, but in terms of coaching, or leadership even.
Well, I would just say, Coach, that's a great starting place, because your personal daily approach and what you are now having to process and navigate is going to have a trickle-down effect. So the fact is that you're evaluating something of, here's what I used to think, and here's what I now think, and here's the circumstance that created it, which it's not unique in the world, but it's very personal to you, right? So that's a great answer. It doesn't necessarily need to be into coaching. Duez, any thoughts?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind is, and this is from a basketball standpoint, the amount of time that is actually needed to get done. Like, Randy, if you wanted to go a little bit more generic and not get into that, like, you can take that one, because I know.
Yeah, that would be the other one.
Yeah, well, you can take that one.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's something that with everything that's been going on between recruiting, being shut down, like, how we spend our time, what the value of practice actually is, like, and what you do in the practice time, and how much time we as coaches are spending on nonsense. It's definitely something that is in my mind. I just was talking to one of my friends who coaches in North Carolina yesterday, and I was like, this is such a unique opportunity for us to realize as coaches, like, we should be able to have a family life and do our jobs at the same time. And for whatever reason, we have created this system in college coaching in particular that it's chasing down time. Like, it's so much nonsense and so much wasted time. Like, how can we be more efficient, and do we have to go back to that? Right? We have this really unique opportunity to reconfigure what being a college basketball coach really means, and what that career means for women, for men, for marginalized groups. Like, let's think about this in this moment. And so definitely practice time, recruiting time you're traveling and spending all over the country trying to find, the perfect athlete. It is definitely something that I'm in the process of changing my mind about. Thank you, Duez, for that.
Yeah, like a good assistant. I gave up mine for the good of the team.
Such a team player.
Well, I'll piggyback on that while you're getting ready here, Duez, is that I've figured out in the last 2 years specifically that you don't need as much time as you think to get done what you need to get done. And in a school like yours, in a school like mine, where the academic stress is beyond what the average student is going to feel, how do you reduce the burden of other things so there's balance? And so we haven't practiced for more than 90 minutes in the last 2 years. And there are times when we practice less than that, which 15 years ago was inconceivable for me. I'm trying to go 3 hours. And in one of these other episodes, my buddy who's a football coach in Sacramento said, hey, practicing for 5 hours or 2 hours isn't going to change how many games you're going to win. You're going to win this many games no matter what. So, like, what's the best way to maximize your time and utilize it in a way that is generative and benefiting everyone involved?
So for me, one thing that has changed is the way I view how good or great different things have to be. At a place like WashU, right, we have a lot of different resources, but one thing that we don't have is we don't have a staff of 5 or 6 people. Right? And my role as an assistant is to manage a lot of things to be able to take it off Randy's plate. Right? So within that, you got gear, you got travel, you got scheduling, you got communication with sports performance. Like, there's a lot of different hats to wear. And again, for me to be able to do my job and still at the same time be great on the floor, still do good scouts, still do good film, I have to give up something. Everything is not going to be great. Right? So even though I want to make sure that when we travel, it is absolutely top notch, instead of me saying, hey, I'm gonna make sure all the girls have their individual orders in their bag and their names are wrote on it. Sometimes they just got to sort it out once we get there. Mm-hmm. Or at this hotel, instead of making sure that they have, we have our AV projector and sound system set up because that's the way we watch film. Okay, hey, go ahead, let's use the hotel's things because it's already set up, right? So learning what to give up, that, because you can't do everything great. And I've had to do that in a lot of different areas. Like I'm a gearhead, mm-hmm. right? From a apparel standpoint, not a car standpoint. And that is something that I could spend hours on a week on. And it's like, yeah, this logo is fine, do it, right? So just learning what to give up that doesn't have to be absolutely great, doesn't have to be absolutely perfected. it's still at a high level. It's still going to get the job done. It's still going to be effective, but at the same time, making it good and then moving on to the next thing so I can make it good instead of one thing being great and dropping the ball in other areas.
Right. So sometimes done is better than perfect.
That is very true.
Yep. Last question. Since we're similarly aged, I'm still, based on the gray, a lot older than both of you, but if we could jump in the DeLorean, we could jump in the DeLorean and go back in time, what advice would you give your younger self? And since the two of you are working together on this, I'm gonna throw a twist into this. What advice would you give your partner's younger self? We got two questions, yourself and what you would give the other.
I'll go first. I would tell my younger self that doing it alone does not make you stronger or better or smarter.
That's good.
And advice I would give Randi, I know she had it as a player, but as a young coach starting out, you're great, go and be great with it.
Awesome. Coach?
Jeez, I don't even want to go.
Well, this is part of that self-awareness piece we talked about earlier, right? It's like, hey, what are the things that in hindsight, if I could give myself the cheat code, here's what it is.
I think the advice I would give my younger self would be to stay intentional, but to be patient and forgiving, basically giving yourself grace as you build the culture that you love. I think that is something that I definitely have learned. It takes time and intentionality, but to just give more grace and patience with the process. And to not be afraid to be yourself. So those two things I think are critical and were critical for me as I developed as a coach. Advice I would give younger Duez. That's so hard, but I think I might have given him this advice already. But
I'm kind of nervous. I wonder if I listened.
No, I think for Duez, I think I would tell him that one, he took one of the things I would tell him is, it's not, if you want to go far, or you want to go, whatever that saying is about going alone, you want to go somewhere significant, it's going with someone together and letting people help you. But I think one thing that I would tell younger Duez is that it's okay to get on the level of somebody else. And it's important, right, is to meet on the level. When I'm just going to tell one story about this, but when I first met Duez and, I went with him to an AAU tournament that he was coaching, and I'm watching and observing him, and he is 6'7". He's huge. Most of the time, the only black guy in the gym because we were living in the Midwest. Definitely one of maybe three on all of the teams that he was coaching, but he's coaching these little 6th grade boys. And Duez is, as you can see on this, he's animated when he coaches big. He's a loud voice. And he is coaching these kids so hard, which is great, right? And so after one of the games, I just said to him, it's awesome how hard you're coaching these boys, but you're coaching them from this 6'7" big, huge guy looking down, like just get on their level, right? Bend down. And so the very next game, he starts doing the same kind of coaching, but he's squatting down and he's looking at these kids eye to eye, and you could see these kids just like their shoulders relax, right? Like they felt seen, they could hear better. And Duez's voice wasn't so loud, but it was just like this really cool way of like seeing, like, let's get on this kid's level where I can still challenge them where they are versus where I see them becoming.
Yeah. Well, I love that story. And it brings up for me, I spent 4 years coaching youth softball when the girls were going through that. And I didn't know much about softball. It was more about how do I apply what I know about coaching and figure this out. And I watched this local guy named John Franklin, when he would do a mound visit, he would go out there and first check where the sun was and position himself so he was looking into the sun and the athletes weren't. And then he would kneel down, right? Because we're dealing with, 10 to or 8 to 12-year-old girls. And, he's 6 foot, 6'1" like I am. And it's like that concept, get down at their level, take the sun on you so that they can lock in. And I think you nailed this. It's like their shoulders relax, right? And it brings that you're still the coach, but you're coming to meet them where they are. And I think that's something that we're not taught when we're younger often. And it's something that you evolve to as a coach and a leader and as an educator. I've said this many times in the last couple of years is, look, as soon as we forget that the students are at the center of the equation, we've lost our compass, right? And so it's like, how do you keep that front of mind? And to your point earlier, Randy, serve others allows us to be more transformational, right, than transactional in what we do. So a great way to end it. Thank you for that story. Really appreciate you taking the time and giving us the knowledge that you've acquired over your career. Appreciate having you here.
That was a great time. Thanks for doing this and having us.
Appreciate it, Jay.